Well, politicians from across the political divide have condemned plans to hold a protest outside a hotel which is housing asylum seekers.
The protest, which will be taking place in Newquay in Cornwall within the week, has been described by some as abhorrent.
Well, immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith can now join us to let us know where this argument stands on a legal level. Good morning to you, Skylar.
Good morning.
Now, I think what people will want to know is whether or not these protesters actually have a legal right to do what they're doing, or not this weekend, but next weekend indeed, and not just in Newquay, but as I understand it, around the country.
Yeah, so protesting is legal in England, and it is a right that it's protected under the European Convention on Human Rights. So yes, the protesters have a right to protest, provided that it is a peaceful protest. So violence or damage caused during a protest is not considered legal. So provided that the protests are peaceful, there really is nothing wrong with individuals protesting against something that they do not believe in. And currently, many people are becoming increasingly frustrated with the system. However, asylum seekers do need to be treated with dignity and respect, and any violence is unacceptable. And many of these asylum seekers are people that are coming to the UK, they're fleeing persecution, and some of those people may have been victims of trauma or torture in their countries of origin. Now, a major issue here is that the UK is accepting more asylum seekers than what it can actually handle. And so the cost of housing these asylum seekers are very high and burdensome on the taxpayer. And there are some asylum seekers that are either coming from safe countries or those whose claims are not substantiated. So, for example, it was recently reported that people smuggling gangs trafficked individuals into the UK. But on the flip side, there are also genuine refugees.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, actually, the vast majority of those coming to Britain are coming from a safe country, which is France. On another note, What do you make of the way that the media, the mainstream media certainly, has portrayed these protesters? Because what happened in the aftermath of Knowsley, which was last week, was that the media portrayed them as far right, as racist, as fascist, as extremists. But then in the aftermath, of course, what happened is it turned out there were serious and legitimate concerns about safety in these areas posed by some, not all, a minority, but some of the refugees who are behaving inappropriately. What would you say about that? The media has been stirring this up, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. They're vilifying these people, and it's not necessarily stemming from racism. They just don't believe in what's happening. And yes, there are safety issues, and then there are situations where there are some refugees that are not actually genuine refugees. And so that is extremely frustrating for many people. And it's certainly not a racist issue here. Now, to claim asylum in the UK, a person must have left their country of origin and be unable to go back because they fear persecution. And so a lot of these people are claiming that they fear persecution, but it's not necessarily genuine in a lot of circumstances.
As you say, that these are refugees, many of them, who are being, as it were, tossed from pillar to post because they come to a refugee centre somewhere near the place where they've landed, and then they're sent to various parts of the country. And clearly they are then on the receiving end of quite hateful demonstrations like some of the ones that we've seen. I mean, does this mean quite clearly that we need a review of the policy handling refugees in this country? Because the one we've got at the moment just isn't working, is it?
No, absolutely. It's not working. And asylum seekers are housed by the Home Office in initial accommodation centres before they're moved on elsewhere in the UK. And so many are being housed in hotels, which is very costly. And there are plans to house asylum seekers in other types of accommodation, such as unused military sites. They also receive a weekly allowance, a monetary allowance, and they are housed for long periods of time in these hotels, and they're not allowed to work for the first 12 months of their claims. And so many could be left for years in these hotels, collecting money every week, not allowed to work. And so the government, they need to reconsider their position on allowing asylum seekers to work. They need to allow them to work much earlier than the 12-month mark, and they need to make it less lucrative for people to come to the UK unlawfully, because they're coming to the UK, they're being housed in hotels and other accommodations, and they're being handed money every week. They're not allowed to work, and that is extremely frustrating for the UK taxpayer.
Something else that's extremely frustrating for the UK taxpayer, Skylar, is the fact we're spending £10.2 million every single day on hotels, and there are currently 37,142 of those individuals, alongside a further 41,388 asylum seekers in hostels. This is a massive, massive problem for the taxpayer, and surely we know that 90% of people who rock up in a dinghy onto the coast at Devon come without documentation or passports. How on earth is it a good idea to let those people to go to work when a lot of them just disappear into the black economy and into the country at large?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's currently a UK cost of living and housing crisis. And so it's not a sustainable system. And the UK needs to seriously reconsider their position. I know that the government is currently developing plans to combat this issue. They're developing a small boats operational command to tackle the channel crossings. And so they're planning to introduce drones, boats, more boats, more cameras. They'll employ more staff. They're also planning to deploy border force officers to Albania, because that is deemed to be a safe country, yet there are many people from Albania coming to the UK and claiming for asylum in the UK. So but they need to seriously reconsider their position. There's a system called the Dublin Regulation, and that's the system that decides which member state is responsible for each asylum claim. And when Brexit went into effect, the UK left this regulation as well. And so really the government needs to reconsider joining that regulation again. And they also should consider expanding the legal pathways to the UK.
Well, I would add quickly there that Ireland is still within the European Union. There have been 37 and rising of these hotel protests over there. They also have the same problem. In fact, they have a much bigger problem with violence. 3 protesters against the refugee protesters have been ran over by cars by opposing protesters in Ireland. So I'm not sure I buy the argument that the European Union is a magic solution to this when we can see the same problem in Ireland.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and something needs to be done about this. And violence is definitely not the answer from both sides, but it's definitely something that needs to be sorted out very quickly.
Well, let's hope that the government manages to do precisely that. Skylar, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.